Welcome to the Movies to Watch Before You Die podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, along with my cousin and co-host,
Gab.
And for the second week in a row, we are fortunate enough to be joined by a wonderful guest from the You Are Good podcast, Alex Steed.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Alex. We're so excited to talk to you about your movie pick.
It's very much my pleasure. And I'm glad you have a place to talk about this one.
And once again, I also feel like we have a guest who has a much more easy to listen to voice than my own, which is always very typical for me.
Oh, stop. Your voice is buttery and smooth.
Dylan, don't listen to him. He's being polite. I cannot let you believe this.
I was going to say.
It's a very cousin-like response.
I've edited every episode of this podcast. Buttery and smooth is not how I describe myself. Okay. Today we're talking about probably the most recent movie I think we've ever done.
Yeah.
I think normally, I tend to go with these very old picks, but before I head straight into the movie, Gab, do you want to tell people real quick why they listen to us, and then we can get into our guest and get into the movie?
Absolutely. Well, between the three of us, we've got a lot of podcasting experience. Three people that really love movies and have pretty strong opinions. And I think that's really the most important thing. So we are here to talk about a movie that Alex has chosen and nominated as one to watch before you die. I know I have strong opinions about it. Alex, I'm assuming you do. Dylan, I'm sure you do as well. So that is why we are here. So Alex, why don't we get into this, and why don't you tell the listeners what this movie is about?
What's this all been about? What am I working toward?
You think you know everything about me, don't you?
I dive at your bottom. I bloody well ought to.
Bones and All is a road movie, I guess I would say. It's a road movie. It's a romance. It's about cannibals. And it's about our primary character, Marin, who realizes through giving into an impulse one day that she has cannibalistic tendencies. And by that, I mean she's a cannibal. And she has to learn this about herself. And then she's left by her father. And she goes out to find her mother. And along the way, as a means of trying to find some answers. And along the way, she meets Lee, who's played by Timothée Chalamet. She meets another gentleman named Sully. They meet a bunch of people on the road. And it's about all the other weirdos they meet along the way. And yeah, that's more or less it. It's quiet. It's a horror movie in theory. It's gruesome in particular places, but it's also very atmospheric, and I find it very beautiful.
Definitely a horror movie that doesn't treat itself like a horror movie.
Sure.
So, yeah. We're going to compare it now to the IMDb plot summary, which is much more succinct and much more unemotional. A young woman embarks on a 1,000-mile odyssey through America, where she meets a disenfranchised drifter, but all roads lead back to their terrifying past and to a final stand that will determine whether love can survive their otherness.
Yeah, totally. It's also just in subtext. I'm sure we'll talk about it more. It's a kind of like a queer love story, which I appreciate.
Yeah,
I did see that. 100%. I saw other things for what the subtext is of the movie. Some I liked more, some I liked less. We only have one tagline this week, which I think I've said lately that I appreciate a movie that goes with one tagline because it feels like it's a confidence in that tagline.
Yeah, what is it?
The tagline is, "Maybe love will set you free."
Okay.
Oh, you know what? For the first time, I don't hate that tagline.
Yeah, Gab famously hates 90%, I'd say, at least, of the taglines that come out for these movies.
Hate them. But that one's not so bad. I can appreciate that. So, Alex, before we kind of get into opinion time proper, why don't you maybe, if you feel like you need to, expand upon that plot summary just for anybody who's listening who hasn't watched the movie. I think it's safe to say spoilers from this point on. If it sounds interesting, stop, go watch the movie, come back, listen to the rest of this episode. But definitely, like, what else happens? What are the main points that people need to know before we start talking about how we feel about it?
Sure. So I can't remember even whenever I'm back in Maine and I'm back home, I get together with one of my best friends and we watch usually bad horror movies together. And so we watched this randomly to fill in the blanks when we couldn't find a good bad one. And we usually watch old ones, so we found this newer one. But this movie takes place in the late 80s. it's not sort of a heavy-handed like Stranger Things 80s feel. It just is the 80s, and you see these little glimpses that make you realize that by way of the cars and stuff.
It feels like a much more regular version of what the 80s were like than like the nostalgic version.
Than like Day Glow, and like it's just like bland. It's bland like the 80s. And there's so much going on in the movie. Again, like the plot is girl essentially realizes that she has some real bad baggage that she's inherited from her family, is trying to get to the bottom of that, and goes on the road. But what I really, there's a lot happening in there that I really enjoy. There's this character whose name is Sully, who's played by a great actor named Mark Rylance, who is kind of her first person that she experiences that lays out what the rest of her life is probably going to look like. It's who she learns from. There are some theories that I actually quite enjoy, that Sully is not an actual character. It's like it represents her relationship with her hunger. And I really enjoy that. I watched it I've seen this movie 5 or 6 times, and so I watched with that in mind and really enjoyed it this go. But I especially just enjoy all of the quiet moments of the movie. It has orchestration by Trent Reznor and Atticus Fitch, who sort of, is that guy's name Atticus Fitch, like in the
Atticus Ross, I think it is.
Atticus Ross.
Oh, I was like, oh my God, that's so funny.
Does he have the To Kill a Mockingbird name? Yes, thank you, Atticus Ross.
It's so funny you say that, because what was it? It must have been a week or two ago on our podcast that I was trying to think of. It's Boo Radley, right? Is the actual
Boo Radley,
and I called him Boo Diddley, and I was like, oh, that's it.
There is, absolutely. There's a similarity there. Well, and so you get the horror. Obviously, I find this movie very related in a lot of interesting ways to my other favorite horror movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But what I most enjoy is you just get these weird moments with everybody they meet along the way, and I enjoy that. I've spent so much time on the road in the US. I've crossed the country by car maybe 10 different times, taking my time doing so and just meeting people. And like, this isn't far off from what that's like. Obviously, my times have been less bloody and harrowing, thankfully, but you certainly meet some real characters. And I think like any good road movie, from this to the Blues Brothers, to like any good road movie, introduces you to all sorts of like heightened versions of the real people you would meet out in the world, and this is no exception.
Yeah,
my mind went straight to like A Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or something like that. It's definitely something that I feel like I can't talk too much about the movie without getting to opinion time, but from a technical standpoint, it's so beautiful everything it does show you on the road, and this is a beautifully shot movie, to say the least, but that is very much going into opinion. So should we go straight into the actual opinion time now?
Let's do it.
In this critic's opinion,
that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, I have a right to my opinion, and my opinion is you have no right to your opinion.
Let's make it official.
Yeah, I don't know that there's like much more in the plot to talk about. It's just like they drive, and then
a lot of
they drive and eat.
It's like sort of meandering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like modern fiction.
It's not one of those movies you watch for the story, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, I don't want to put Alex on the spot to continue to talk, but I feel like as the person who nominated this movie, like I'd love to hear sort of your opinion. Like, what is it about this movie that when you were asked to nominate a movie to watch before you die, your heart went to this one?
I don't know exactly what it was. I know that when we had connected about my appearing on the show, I think I had just recently watched this and was extremely moved by it. Mm-hmm. And I remain moved by it. I think it is it's a quiet movie, it's a weird movie. Like, similar to what you were saying at the top of the show, this is a recent movie, and all the movies that we cover on our show are almost 100% of the time at least 15 years old, if not older. Mm-hmm. So it's rare that I actually dive into a newer movie in the way that I did here. It speaks to a lot of sort of anxieties about queerness, which I find really compelling. It's in sort of being in socially unacceptable. I'm not comparing queerness to cannibalism. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I definitely also had that moment where I was like, it's so interesting because it feels completely relatable in terms of like the internal battle of
Sure.
I'm not but at the same time on the surface it's like I don't want to say it. Are you going to say it? Like, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Because it feels wrong. But it's definitely like, I think cannibalism is probably the single most taboo subject in Western culture,
Sure,
right? Like,
absolutely.
And I suppose at one point or another, so was homosexuality and queerness, and now it sort of feels like such a foreign concept for those two things to be like considered equally taboo, because in modern times it's like cannibalism is crazy, but like being queer isn't, right?
Right.
So but yeah,
to
say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's about waking up and realizing a thing about you that was very evident maybe to a lot of the people around you is suddenly evident to you.
Yeah.
And you have to go out and find and the path has like a lot of overlap. Like you find different people, particularly when things are a bit more underground, you find different people who operate in different ways, who have different ideas about like how best to operate. They have rules of engagement. They have suggestions about how to and how not to do something. There are taboos. There's this whole relationship at the beginning of the movie with her and a girl that she's in high school with, and obviously it leads to a very uncomfortable and gory biting scene, but it feels like it's leading to something maybe sort of like crushy or sexual. There are all of these things that the movie touches on with regard to, and even if we sort of take one step out of the examination of queerness, just the anxiety of being able to like be yourself or have particular desires or whatever, and it uses this thing as a metaphor. I don't know. I love it. And like I said earlier, they're extremely different movies with regard to implementation, delivery, execution, etc. But this movie has so much in common, so much like DNA of the great both like film on its own and horror film. Best horror film, one of the best films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, has a lot in common. It's like a strange road movie. There's some real brutality in it, but there are really incredibly gorgeous shots. Like it's about specific kinds of American anxiety. It's got a lot in common with greatness.
I think ironically, this movie definitely shows a lot more, I don't want to call it gratuitous, but there's a lot more violence in this certainly than there is in the actual Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes, there's more, which is a very interesting, and that's a great point because it's such an interesting inversion, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, its imagery makes you feel disgusting while not ever being overtly bloody. Whereas this has all of this gorgeous imagery, but it will really go there on some gory shots with regard to like anatomical realness that does the inverse thing, but still leaves you feeling at the end like a lot unsettled.
Although I think I'll say that the most horrific moment of Bones and All for me was when Rudy Giuliani appears on a television. That was when I was scared.
I'm really trying to unpack that still. Like it's such a specific piece of media for someone to be watching. Even like an American
time period.
Exactly. Like even in American consciousness, because like Giuliani's sort of star turn happened in the early 90s, not even by the late 80s. So like just it's such a choice and one that I'm fascinated by, and one that I don't have any. The only overtly political statement outside of Giuliani showing up on TV, the only overt political statement that we get is that we meet a real asshole at a grocery store who eventually gets eaten by Chalamet, and he's driving a car with a Bush 84 sticker on it. And I'm like, that's sort of the most overt that we get. But yeah, the Giuliani thing is still trying to unpack.
Yeah, I paused the television actually to Google those events to see like, is this 1990? Is this
where'd you land?
I landed at 1990, but I was also like trying to piece together. I mean, they were talking about something that could have been from 88 to like 91. So I wasn't positive. But I mean, initially, to be honest with you, I was watching this thinking, is this a period piece? Like, is this the 80s, or are they just poor? Like, what?
Oh my God. And I love, to be honest, like if you're going to do period, that's all I want. I mean, I think the best, I don't know if either of you saw, gosh, what's the movie that Barbarian? Did you see Barbarian when it came out last year? Barbarian has a scene that takes place in the 1980s. And it's obvious when you're sort of like in places or whatever, but again, it's not like this is the 80s. Like it's not sort of yelling it at you. And I really like it when you're like, are we in now? Are we in another time? Is it just like the middle of the country and it looks like what is happening?
Yes.
So I appreciate that. And the only thing that feels like it maybe was wrong by way of the time period is that the asshole in the store is asking loudly, indignantly for Lunchables, which I think came onto the market in 1988, and I would assume would had to have been around for a while for someone to just assume that every store has Lunchables. But yeah, so I'm guessing somewhere between 88 and 90 myself. That's good.
He was a very original follower of the Lunchable, I guess.
Yeah, he was like, I love Lunchables, and it's crazy that you don't have them.
Yeah, I guess there was an extent to which it could have been like, you know, Gab, you said it might be just a period out of time, because Napoleon Dynamite is that movie to me where I'm like, this is current, but nobody looks current, you know?
Yes,
and I think that's a result of the Midwest. Yes.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, because that's the other thing is like it is the they like land in this movie in Ann Arbor, and that's another thing about period movies is like a period movie in New York that takes place in 89 looks much different than a period movie in Iowa, and it could because it's 20 years because before the internet there were huge swaths of the country that were fully and fundamentally 20 years behind other parts of the country, particularly urban parts of the country, just because that's how the economy worked.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, it's so interesting. I went into this watch with no knowledge. I actually first accidentally typed into my little Roku app, But the Bones, because I swore that's what it was called. It was called But the Bones.
Very
and
different
I
results,
was wrong.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Very different results. I finally found it and I'm like, okay, this is cool. And something maybe I had read or saw or inferred that this was based on a young adult novel.
Yes.
So I thought
I had very similar. Yes. I'm glad to hear you say this.
So I was like, okay, Twilight, kind of like it's going to be, you know, this girl's on her own or she's lonely in school and she's going to make some friends, but they're going to turn on her. And I was kind of along for the ride. And then she just bit this girl. And I was like, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And I honestly, and it's funny, and I'll give you context, Alex. We did a watch of The Lovely Bones not too long ago, which I had memories of being a good movie, and we immediately decided was not a great movie. But Stanley Tucci did a good job and deserved his Oscar nomination for that.
Love him.
But I had famously said in that episode over and over and over again, I want to see a murder. I want to see this little girl get sexually assaulted. Like there's no depiction of this horrible tragedy. Yeah. So how am I to believe it happened? And oh my God, I was like, well, I finally got what I wanted because I have seen so much gore and so many murders. And I actually started to feel kind of nauseous. And it had this effect on me where I was like physically ill. And, you know, I'm not that type of person who's very dramatic. I frequently say that like horror movies don't bother me because I worked in the industry. I'm too familiar with the practices. It's also very cliche, you know, blah, blah, blah. But this really affected me. And I almost think maybe a second watch where I'm less distracted by how like I thought this was going to be Twilight and it was so not. But there is something that is really deeply unsettling about it that, you know, at the end of the day, when we're talking about art, like it should leave a lasting impact. It should affect you. And this really, really did. Like, really did. Dill, I mean, what do you think?
It feels like if Twilight was directed by like David Cronenberg, because it is still very Twilighty, but it has this very practical gore element to it. And I love practical effects. I'm the guy who suggested The Thing on this podcast. And, you know, I do constant movies where I try and get Gab to love practical effects, and she keeps turning them down, which is very stressing to me.
It's growing on me slowly.
Well, that's good. But
Slowly.
still, the fact that The Thing was not a movie to watch before you die, consensus, very upsetting to me, Alex. But I do feel like while I very technically connected with it, and I connected with it in some ways, but in some ways I just wasn't vibing with the lead performances for me.
Sure.
And I think maybe that's the way they're written, that it felt very understated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that it just didn't grab me because of how understated it was. I think after the movie, well, first, Gab went, I think it was a very, you said queer subtextually film. And I was like, I don't think that's what it's about. Immediately to be like, wait a second. And I do feel like once I saw an interview, I think it was with Timothée Chalamet, who was saying to him what the character's cannibalism was about was trauma and dealing with demons that you can't comprehend and addiction. And when I put it through that lens, I was like, oh, I definitely vibe with that a bit more. I see that a bit more. I get that the parent having a hard time raising that child a bit more. I get that the mother feeling like she might have passed that down and having a generational trauma.
Sure.
That all, I was like, oh, I get that more. And that gave me a greater appreciation, certainly. I will say, and I feel like this is my hot take, is I might have even said this before, Timothée Chalamet, I kind of don't get the super hype.
I agree.
You know what I mean? I'm like, he's fine.
Well, it's so funny because this was the outside of Beautiful Boy, which I loved, and Beautiful Boy is about addiction, and Timothée Chalamet is as a person who has had their ups and downs in that arena, Timothée Chalamet delivered in that movie. But I feel similarly, and I think like part of what struck me about this movie, and we probably have the opposite reactions to him in this movie, but I was like, oh, this helps me get him in a way where other movies I was like, what exactly is he doing? Like, what is his role here? And I kind of appreciate that about him. But yeah, this was like one of the first movies where I saw him and I was like, I get it. But I do think that you're right with regard to the minimalism or the kind of like light touch, or I don't know how exactly you would describe it, but there is an understated aspect to how they are acting, which you see in contrast, particularly when they're with the stronger characters like Sully, who is just like, Sully might be one of my favorite villains of all time in any movie, whether or not he is in her imagination or real. I love him. And then you get Francesca Scorsese, who is not an actress, I will say, based on what we see on screen. She plays his sister.
Oh my God.
Not an actress, but I appreciate that she's there doing it.
Wait, I don't think that is Francesca Scorsese.
That is not? Yeah, I believe it is.
According to IMDb, it was Anna Cobb. I think Francesca Scorsese, I had read, had a role that was cut or something like that. Oh my
God. Okay, I'm glad that you said that, because this entire time, based on whatever on IMDb or cast, this entire time I have thought that was Francesca Scorsese.
Well, ironically, it's funny you say Francesca Scorsese, who is not an actress, because I think Gab and I both had a similar reaction of like, she's kind of doing the least to us, because it feels like when I look at the actors in this movie, you know, the experience that comes from Mark Rylance, the instant comparison I think of is there's two moments that people have these stutters in. And Mark Rylance has this stuttering moment, but it feels like you're watching Sully stutter. And the sister has a stuttering moment, and I'm like, did they just not get a second take of this where she didn't stutter? Because that's what it felt like to me. It felt like it was just the actress making that mistake, not Kayla making that mistake. Yeah, and maybe that's just me giving more credit to Mark Rylance as an actor, subconsciously. But Mark Rylance and Michael Stuhlbarg, I think is his name, who shows up in one scene as Jake, who you will better remember as man in overalls who is not clothed otherwise.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
yes,
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah,
Menacing.
that was a great performance. But I did have to pause the movie when the sister first came in and was all upset that he was leaving again. And I was like, this is not good.
Yeah,
She's
no,
so bad.
I whatever. I wouldn't be great in this situation. I guess. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm trying to knowing whatever stuff gets back to people. I don't. But it's not. It feels like a little bit like she's in a different movie, and I couldn't again. Like I was like, was this a disorienting choice? Was this what I did not know? My only criticism of this movie, my only criticism of this movie is that is in context of everyone else, like kind of a weak portrayal.
And it just felt like, I always say that really good acting is like looking through a window, right? Like you're seeing what's beyond the window, and bad acting is like a dirty window where you see the fingerprints and it's hard to see what's through on the other side because you're so distracted by what's on the window. And it felt almost like she was delivering a performance that was like stained glass, where it's like you're meant to see the window and not what's through it. And it was like, this is such a strong choice, but why?
Well, and it reflects that her context gives, there are times where you can tell that Chalamet is acting in context of being with her, and like his acting is kind of brought down a little bit because of sort of like the cadence of their exchange. But overall, I mean, what I enjoy most about this is like as a package, I left. And when I think about movies like art, especially, and I don't mean to get on a soapbox or whatever, but like especially when there are these conversations that I never know if they're actual conversations that with regard to sort of the source material, or if it's people having conversations about what they believe are conversations. But this whole idea that younger people don't like seeing sex in movies, or they don't like particular things that are challenging in particular, or whatever. Like, I like that this is a movie that is also art, and it's art evidenced by the fact that I could not stop thinking about it after the fact. Like, it stirred something in me, it unsettled something in me in a way where I was like, I need more of that so I can understand it more. And I'm 5 viewings in and I still feel that way.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of how we felt about Vampire's Kiss. Have you ever seen that movie?
I've never seen that.
With Nicolas Cage.
I've heard
highly recommend.
Great.
Highly recommend. It I couldn't move forward. I needed my boyfriend to watch it with me. I was like, I can't live in a world where you have not seen this because I need to talk to you about it. We had to do a whole new episode where we changed our standing on it. It just really stuck with you. But I think for me, this movie, it had all the components of a young adult sort of coming of age, learning who you are and learning to be okay with that. And all of the makings of a gory horror thriller, sort of like melodrama. Mm-hmm. And the way that those two worlds kind of came together for me, it essentially, like, I don't want to say it didn't work because it did, but it was so unsettling that I didn't feel like I never got relief, sure. Like the way that the film ended, which I don't know if we really want to get into that. I'll leave that up to you two, but the way that it ended did not leave me feeling at all. And I don't even mean uplifted, right? Because there are plenty of incredible films that leave you feeling sad or scared or, unsettled. But this truly felt like I felt worse at the end than I did at any point before. And I don't know if we want to get into that, obviously spoilers, but
so
I was like, definitely not uplifting. She's right, Alex.
I just
it's so because like, this movie is like, I feel better after watching. But I get it. I get what you're saying entirely. Like,
yeah.
If ever I saw someone was like, Steve Bones, and it would come with so many disclaimers. Like, I'd be like, if you enjoy being unsettled, this is the way to go. Or or the
Yeah.
gore isn't even just gore, it's like anatomically correct gore, which makes it even
Yes.
more difficult. Like all of those things. Yeah, I would give maybe a page and a half of disclaimers before I strongly encouraged a person to watch this.
Yes.
We
And the
didn't
funny
get any
thing is,
disclaimers, Alex.
no
I
disclaimers.
thought you guys could handle it.
I am notorious for missing subtext, and I feel like I nailed the subtext, and I was still like, I was alone, and I was like kind of sick to my stomach, and I was like, when is somebody coming home? Like, I need an adult. Oh
my
God.
Well, I feel honored that I was able to facilitate those feelings for you too.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's definitely one of those movies that I will probably never stop thinking about. And I will continue to ask people, hey, did you ever see this movie? Because we could talk about it.
Yeah.
It's funny though, because saying that is such a positive thing to say about it that it's like, you know what, it's never going to leave my mind. But it didn't have that same effect on me because I am somebody who, like I said, I've watched so many gory whatever it is. You know, I feel like the last thing I saw anything from that really affected me like that was like Bone Tomahawk, and that was like, I don't know if either of you know Bone Tomahawk.
Yes, I know that well.
It is the most grotesque, gratuitous violence you could think of. You know what I mean? Like people being bifurcated. Yeah, I just think it's funny because I know you guys just recently did American Psycho, which is a movie I love.
Love.
And that's a movie that is filled with violence, but it's done in such a entertaining to you way. And this movie is filled with violence, but it's so somber. And as Gab's described, not uplifting. And
Not uplifting.
I think it's definitely tough because underneath they're very different movies. Like Patrick Bateman, we're never meant to sympathize with his otherness, which is, I guess, you know, at the end of the day, what you're supposed to be doing with this movie. There's no romance to Patrick Bateman. The only real connection between the two is Chloe Sevigny.
Yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, they share her in common.
Yeah, but I feel so bad because I feel like we're describing so many good things about it. I'm like, it just wasn't the vibe.
That's okay. That's okay if you didn't like it.
But it is funny. I do feel like what Gab said. I'm like, but I definitely thought a lot about it, which definitely speaks to a quality that is very important in a movie to leave you thinking about it, because there are movies that entertain you that leave you immediately.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's specifically the thing. You said it perfectly, and I'm not. This isn't the pitch for it, but there's so much art I love that I don't want in my house. You know, there's so much art that I'm like, holy shit, that's amazing. I understand the whole thing. I get it. I'm not hanging it in my living room.
Yeah.
But because the hanging in your living room part is like entertainment, the appreciating art part is appreciating art. And is this movie like an inherently a like broadly entertaining movie? Probably not. Like probably big no. But did it accomplish things in a way that even some of the most entertaining movies I've seen this year did not? Yeah, absolutely. I think that it sits with me. It lives with me in a way that like movies that like, I love The Nice Guys every time. A week later, I can't tell you what happens in it.
The piece of art that this immediately makes me think of is, I don't know if either of you know it by name, Saturn Devouring His Son. Do you guys know what that painting is? Gab, do you know?
I do.
Let me Google it.
I recommend a quick Google.
You'll recognize it for sure.
Saturn Devouring His Son is one of those things that every time I do somehow come across it, I stare at it and I'm like, this is so freaky. And I've like read the story behind the guy who like lived in isolation and he like died with the painting in his home or something like that. And it's exactly what you're saying. Would never want it hanging in my house, but I'm endlessly fascinated by looking at it.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Gab's looking at it now. I heard the oh boy.
Why are his pants down?
It's that's your objection?
I mean, listen, I did watch the movie. Like, oh, there are so many versions of it.
I've seen people with this as a phone case, and I'm like, this is someone I enjoy. This is a real weirdo. I like that.
Yeah, you got to be a very specific
crazy
person to be like, let me show off this. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Every time I'm taking a call, let me put this in the public.
Yeah, honestly. Wow.
And you know, there's some kid next to that person in the grocery line seeing that for the first time. Like, what is that? What is that, Mom?
Honestly. That's so funny. Yeah. I think context is everything. And so I think not understanding what it was that I was going to be seeing kind of had an impact. But I also think it was sincerely a haunting piece of art that did not, for me, even like there was no summation of the events. There was no period at the end of the sentence. There was no end. It was like I felt so just absolutely haunted for the rest of the night and part of today. And then the research I did before this brought me right back.
Didn't help you. You know what I like the most about it in a way is like most coming of age movies are like, and then they have a very definite period at the end, like, and this happened and then it was whatever. And that is not how life works. Like what happens is you like transition to another phase while some other phase is happening. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of go like phase to phase. It's not like unless a super dire thing happens, like you have to eat your partner. Unless a super dire thing happens, like yes, we know. And that's kind of how I feel about adolescence. Is like what this did really well in capturing like what adolescence is like is everything is nothing until it's something, and then when it's something, it's everything. And I transitioned out of that without ever knowing I transitioned out of it, because suddenly I was just in a new phase. And you know, you only kind of realize when you're out of your adolescence or out of your teens in retrospect, when you're mourning that it's gone. It's not like one day it's over and then you're like, whatever. And that's kind of what I enjoy about what this does is there's no like, and I'm not saying that this is what anyone's looking for in a coming of age movie, and I'm not even saying this is a coming of age movie, but there isn't that end of like the Breakfast Club with Bender sort of putting his hand up in the air and they play the music or whatever. It's just like, well, on to the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I kind of love that description of adolescence you just gave. Because first of all, that's exactly what this movie feels like. And that is exactly, I feel like we've said it before on the podcast, a much clunkier way of saying that, where we've been like, yeah, at the time, everything felt like it was the most important thing in the world. And I feel like that sums it up so nicely into a sentence. And yeah, that is what it feels like is going on in this movie to a very certain extent. And it is such an abrupt ending that I now want to see with Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me at the end.
Or are you familiar with the Walk of Life project? There was a great, this was years ago, there was a great Tumblr. This is how long ago it is. It's Tumblr, but there was a great Tumblr that added the Dire Straits song Walk of Life to the end of every movie.
Oh, okay.
And so like the closing minute and a half, and they add it, and it's funny because it works literally every time. It's like the best piece of punctuation to put on a movie, but this would be perfect for that, or that, or even like this, a movie that has kind of this movie has more of a structure and a syntax and series of punctuation than one of what I think is the best movies ever made, Dazed and Confused. But what Dazed and Confused has at the end of it is playing Tuesday's Gone by Leonard Skinner, and you feel like the movie's over. This just has like Trent and Atticus's weird drone and then credits, and then you're like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
I also feel like, in keeping with that trend you were talking about with Dire Straits, I'm also now picturing the Linkin Park from the end of Transformers song at the end of this. Yeah. And just what I've done after she's spoilers eating Chalamet.
Oh my God. Please. So that actually makes me want to bring up a point. So Alex, I have a friend named Scott, and Scott is very into all of this stuff. And by all of this stuff, I mean anything that is somehow related to like anything that comes from this sort of young adult genre. Okay. He'll hate me for saying that, but for our purposes, that's how I feel about it.
Sure.
And so I texted him after I watched this movie and I said, have you seen Bones and All with Timothée Chalamet? And he said, of course, I saw it twice in the movie theaters.
Wow.
And I said, okay, of course you did.
Scott.
And then I said, I you know, I don't remember exactly, but something about I'm like nauseous. I can't believe I just watched this. Like, what are your thoughts? And he said, I can't believe you're nauseous. What could be more romantic than eating the person you love, bones and all?
Absolutely.
And I
don't agree, but I get what he's saying.
Yeah, I'm like, how about not
I appreciate that. I'm like, literally anything else? I'm like, I don't know. I would love a child, maybe. That feels like the opposite. opposite, right? Like, what are you talking about?
I tell my wife on a daily basis, don't eat meat.
I know you love me. Please don't. I know. I'm like, God, like damn near anything else. I'd love an engagement ring. I don't know about that, but I think I'm just wondering your thoughts on, like, that feels like an oversimplification, of course, but like, to me, there was nothing romantic about it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just so haunted by the imagery.
So there's two takes, right? One, well, I'm sure there's many takes, but one take is, if Sully is a real character, a real person in this universe that is not sort of an embodiment of her desire and hunger, she doesn't eat her partner unprompted, right? Like he gets stabbed and he's actively dying, and like even if they call paramedics, he's stabbed through the lung, he's dead. Yeah. So what happens is this very adolescent imagination of what is beautiful, which is, we are going to be together forever. Like, all you want as a kid with your dumb high school relationship that you think is so fucking important, and it's absolutely not. It's a waste of your time to take your high school relationship into college because you think this is going to last forever. For example, I'm just giving advice to any of your 17-year-olds listening.
By the way, was me with Scott, which is what is so hilarious.
Of course, same. I was like, this is so important. This is the most important love affair, and it's not. Right. But the idea that like you can then be a part of each other's lives forever, it's not like she murdered him. She's acting on the fact that he's dying, and rather than them being separate, him in the ground, he's a part of her symbolically. Great.
Yeah.
The other take is,
which
if
I think
Sully
I like a lot better that you're about to describe.
Yes, the other take is, if Sully is not real, and Sully is the manifestation of her hunger, and she can't keep her hunger at bay, and her hunger is why Chalamet dies, and she eats him, and he's just like, eat me, you're going to, like this seems like part of your objective. That's sad, because like her lack, essentially, and we all know this person or many of these people, their lack of emotional regulation gets in the way of your ability to have a healthy relationship with them. That defines a lot of high school relationships. And that's not romantic. That's incredibly sad, because she, like her mother, is going to spend the rest of her life alienating, isolating, pushing away people, getting herself killed, eating off her hands, like whatever.
Yeah.
That's where it jives more with addiction to me, because it feels like,
sure,
if there's a version of this that is addiction, and Sully is her fear of what she'll become, it's her becoming Sully when she does, kill Sully if he isn't real, and kill Lee, because she is then fully becoming that lonely drifter that she's afraid of becoming, who will forever be by herself, who will end up sort of like her mother. And I do see that as like, oh, this generational trauma that was passed down to her. And that I was like, wow, okay, that speaks to me more. That I get. I understand that, and I understand the fear of that. And I found that very interesting, much more interesting than if this is just, your very R-rated glorified Twilight movie. You know what I mean? I was like, once I wasn't thinking of it from any sort of sexuality, you know what I mean? That it's not about queerness, that it's not about, Chalamet and Taylor Russell. Once I was thinking about it from that metaphor for something else, it felt much more powerful to me than just love,
Well, into that point about Twilight, which keeps coming up, I feel like Bella has it worse than our protagonist here, because Bella it gets essentially a life-death sentence. Like she is that forever now, and she's going to be with fucking Edward, boring Edward, for the rest of her life. And in this case, you have a great love, you become a part of each other forever, and you don't have to be shackled to the lover for the rest of your life, which I feel like is sort of a win for an 18-year-old.
Yeah,
I feel like our version of Bella in this movie is the guy who is the normie, who's not an actual eater. He's just like, I just love hanging out with this. For some reason, I find this endlessly fascinating. He feels like the one who's like, no, we're gonna last forever, and you know what? Eating is the coolest thing.
Well, and how interesting is that? Where, however you want to see what the parallel is or whatever the themes are, that the person who is not haunted by the inevitability of how they are is okay with it. And the person who is haunted with the inevitability of how they are has to struggle with the burden of being that.
Yeah.
And that's why I like that guy a lot, is it's like, well, of course you like it. You don't have to do it. You're opting into doing it. I have to do this. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it makes so much more sense for why she can't be around him. Like once she finds that out, she is out of the picture with them.
Yeah, absolutely. You're doing the thing that tears me apart by choice.
Yes.
Like that's it's a fascinating.
I thought they were going to come back.
Me too. And but that's the thing that I love. You know, another movie that this reminds me of, and I don't know if either of you've seen it, is The Way We Go. And it's a great road movie. It was written by Dave Eggers. It's Jim from The Office. What's that guy's name?
John Krasinski.
John Krasinski and Maya Rudolph. And they realize that they're having a kid, and they drive around the country to figure out where they want to land.
I remember that.
All of their interactions are like a little similar to the interactions in this movie, where like the people are at once fascinating and like kind of entirely unsettling, or very sad, or extremely haunted by something. It's more beautiful. It doesn't leave you feeling the way that y'all left feeling in this movie. But I like that there are these people that feel so consequential that you're like, they have to come back, but they don't. Because again, from all of my travel, I can think of people who it's like, how is that just a one-act person? Like, how is that person who I can remember every detail of that conversation we had and every element of their life? How is it that I'm only ever going to have that interaction with them? And I find that very true to like the nomadic nature of being alive.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of putting it, especially for the period that this takes place in, where it's like, there is no way
you're not going to like connect on Instagram.
Yeah, they're not going to be like sliding into each other's DMs, like whatever ended up happening with you and Lee. Yeah.
So even if you get an address, if they move, you're screwed. You know, like you just don't know. Yeah.
So I want to kind of transition a little bit into this idea of changing the genre. So we've been toying with this for a little while, and we want to kind of play with, if you could change one and only one element of the plot, one thing that happens within the plot, to create a different genre, any genre, other than, I guess, horror, romance, melodrama. What would you change, and what genre would it become? Dylan and I have had an opportunity to think about this. So to avoid putting you on the spot, I'm going to put Dylan on the spot and make him go first, and then I'll share mine. And if you have one, you can feel free to join.
My initial thought is, how would I make this a comedy? Because that's where my mind went to. And it's immediately the thought that Marin and Lee cannot stand the sight of blood. So I imagine that they have to eat, but they're like, oh, I'm gonna faint. I can't look at this.
Oh my god, that's very funny.
That's good. I made mine into also a comedy, but I think there's like a subgenre of like buddy movie where the normie comes with them on their trip, and they have to teach him all of the ways and how they do things. And he asks very annoying questions, and they need to sort of educate him, and kind of like, he's like the little brother tagging along, always asking questions.
And he sniffs out Sully coming at the end and saves the day.
That's very nice.
Could be.
Oh, because he's finally can do something that they can do. That's a great turn. Like, that would have been a great movie.
It's a little fun. It's really almost like Rain Man meets
meets whatever the hell this is.
Yeah, exactly.
This is such an interesting and unique question in the context of the fact that this movie is a competing series of genres at any given time.
Yeah.
And I guess I would be interested in, although this kind of would defeat the purpose, and all it would do is really eliminate a genre, which is like the romance part. But just like, I would be totally fine with this movie if they were uninterested in each other entirely, and they were just people who ended up meeting and having this thing in common and having to get to know each other sort of begrudgingly along the way. Because I will say, for as much as like this is a romance between these two, their romantic time takes very little of the screen time. There are huge swaths of time before we meet Chalamet that he's not on screen. There are huge swaths of time after we know Chalamet and he's not on screen. So we could we could get rid of the love and it would be doing a much different thing, but there'd still be a lot of interesting stuff to work through.
Yeah.
I do
To
like
that
that
point
idea.
also, I also think that much as you were talking about, your high school romance feeling very important and kind of ultimately being very inconsequential in your life, I think it's probably safe to say that the romance between the two of them is very surface level. And other than the fact that they obviously understand each other on a very deep level where most people don't, but I think you feel that way about your sort of first love, no matter what, right? And so I think the romance between them probably is relatively inconsequential and, not necessarily, if he were to live, they probably wouldn't end up spending the rest of their lives together either way.
No, ideally. No.
Yeah.
I do think that, I think that's exactly right. You guys are making me feel so ironically good about the fact that my wife and I have known each other since high school, but didn't start dating until college. And I think we both have said, if we had started dating in high school, it never works.
The curse.
Yeah.
But boy, I really like that idea of them sort of maybe just being begrudging support for each other and like maybe even having conflict with each other, because I do think that could present something interesting too, because she also feels morally so different about things than he does. And they sort of like, they conflict about it occasionally, but we get past that very quickly for the love for each other, which am I the only one who every time they kissed was like, oh, is this the one where somebody takes a bite out of somebody's lip? You know what I mean?
Yes. I was
Well,
watching
that.
That makes total sense, and it makes the payoff of what actually does happen even more interesting.
Yeah.
Like, nope, it's actually going to be much more harrowing. I there were several parts where to your point, a lot of their conflict could be born of the fact that they have exactly the opposite experience. He has known his entire life what he is, and had to be the one to explain to his father sort of what his deal was, and then it led to a direct conflict between him and his father. Whereas she had the exact opposite experience. She didn't know her entire life. She just found out her father is the one who told her about everything, and then there's no conflict because her dad leaves. And so, they have the opposite attachment traumas. they can theoretically get along better as a result. But there were a number of times because of that conflict. She's new to the whole thing. He's seasoned in his way, where they could have butt heads a lot more. There is an incident where he kills a carny. That he lures by way of a male carny that he lures sexually. They have sex, and then he kills the carny, and the conflict comes from the fact that it is revealed that the carny had a family at home, and they took this guy from the family. And so there are all of these points where there could be conflict, but the only way conflict is resolved in this movie is they just don't see each other for long periods of time and then come back together, which itself feels like a young relationship where it's like, you spend the semester away, you see each other Thanksgiving at the bar, and then suddenly you're in a relationship again for 4 days.
Yeah.
Can we also mention he does kill this carny at the most inopportune of times for the carny? Like I was like, give that carny
let him finish
30 more seconds and then kill him. Yes.
Yeah. That's super bummer, honestly. Like that is the most homophobic thing that happens in the whole movie.
Yeah.
I will also say I have one last small change idea. We could change this into an action movie if we give Sully like a roving gang of Mad Max type warriors with him.
Because Sully, that's what I thought. That is a great recommendation, because Sully is from the movie Near Dark. Like he's not actually, but like he has this like gritty, almost zany. He's almost in an entirely different movie, which I think is a thing that like I find interesting about him.
I could watch with him as the main character for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it feels like he's from like a post-apocalyptic vampire road movie or something, and he would totally have like a Lost Boys like or Near Dark like or Nightbreed like gang of conspirators.
Lost Boys we did Lost Boys on the podcast, and I could so see him replacing like the nerdy nice guy
for sure
who's the real leader of them. Oh my god, that would totally work.
Totally.
Yeah
100%. I love Sully so much, and I think Sully is like 90% of the reason this movie stuck with me in a big way, is I can't put my finger on why. Like it's a thousand different choices that are working together really, really well. with him and with his portrayal that again like stuck with me in a way where it's only recently that I encountered the theory that Sully's not real, and like that gives a whole other dynamic.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I do too. Just the portrayal of him. He speaks in the third person. We never understand why. He has an interesting stutter. We don't understand why. He keeps the ponytails and hair of his victims braided into an 8-foot rope, which is the grossest thing I can possibly imagine. We learn at the end that he's killed Chalamet's sister because he has her hair on the rope. Like everything about him is fascinating to me.
And he has his own braid too, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, he has his own little ponytail, and
Sully's always braided.
So much flair that he would make Jennifer Aniston from Office Space jealous. He is covered in flair for some reason. Like that's just like Sully trademark. That's what Sully do. You know,
that's really good.
Yeah.
And from the moment we see him, we're like, what is happening? Like, why is it? But subtly, like we're introduced to his menace. It unfolds in a really, to me, a fascinating, and it to the point where he, not the last scene where spoiler alert, they kill him when he comes to kill Chalamet, or he comes to take her, but Chalamet gets killed. But the scene right before where he shows up in the van, his going from like, you know, just a pest to a menace very, very quickly in the dialogue sits with me still.
Yeah.
I honestly, in the beginning when she first meets him, there's a lot of me that was like, this movie would make sense if she sticks with him, considering her dad just left, and they like,
sure,
like if not for the fact that the poster is Timothée Chalamet and Taylor Russell, knowing that it's going to be the two of them, I could see this being a movie where it's, you know, he teaches her, I've been at this a long time, like they learn from each other, that type of thing. And when she leaves him and you just see him seeing her leave, I felt genuinely bad for him, which I was like very surprised that I was like, why is this the character I feel for? What does that say about me? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? But so like every time Sully talks, you kind of feel bad for him because you do get that he's just lonely, and there's sort of a snapping of him. Like even in the very beginning, he's saying, I don't kill. At least I try not to. He says something along those lines, and you're like,
yeah,
this guy's definitely killed people. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
I thought he was going to stick around more. And I will say, I did text Gab because we happened to watch this at the same time separately. And I think I pretty much called exactly what was going to happen. Like, I was like, Sully's coming back. One of these characters isn't making it. This is a tragic love story type thing.
Yeah.
And obviously that wasn't exact, but I do feel like this is very, you know, you're somewhat standard Romeo and Juliet dressed up with a very exotic and interesting twist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
A lot of the beats are stuff that you've seen before, but like what is, you know, sort of the exterior or what it's filled in with. You know, it's bones or things that you've seen before, but the rest of it are it's like an interesting covering or dressage.
Yeah.
What was it, Gab? It's butts and bones you've seen before, but done differently.
yeah. But the bones, very different. Well, yeah, Dill, I mean, I think we've all really had an opportunity to share our feelings. So before we kind of get to our final verdicts, why don't you share a couple facts?
I want the truth!
Face the facts, ducks.
Facts have no place with an organized religion.
Surprising for a recent movie, it was hard to find a lot of like fun trivia facts for this movie. Not just because it's not a very uplifting, fun movie. I do normally just find a lot of fun facts, but we'll start where we normally start, which is our ratings. IMDb gives it a 6.8 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes, the tomato meter gives it 82%, an average rating of 7.4 out of 10, 235 fresh reviews, 53 rotten. It's an audience score of 62% with an average score of 3.4 out of 5. To get into our critics' consensus, although its subject matter may be hard to stomach, Bones and All proves a deeply romantic and thought-provoking treat. So I got a couple of reviews I'm going to read here. I already don't remember which ones are good and which ones are bad, so we'll find out together. From Lorshka Ivanzadeh from the Metro newspaper, dreamily shot, it's also achingly hip, it hurts. But after 2 hours and 10 minutes of slow burn meandering, I was hungry for more meat on these bones. I feel like the lowest common denominator of every like review snippet you see around Tomatoes is like, I'm getting a pun in this one.
You have to. How could you not? It's right there.
Peter Travers from ABC News, a love story about two pretty young cannibals won't strike everyone as an appetizing dish, but you won't be able to take your eyes off Chalamet and Russell as they try to reconcile romance with killer impulses on a road trip through hell. Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times, before Bones and All reaches its unsurprising, albeit haunting conclusion, we've lost our appetite. And last one here, and I think this one I sort of agree with a lot. Keith Ulich from Slant Magazine, both Taylor Russell and Timothy Chalamet are sadly at a disadvantage given how many of the older actors gnaw at the scenery like it's a still warm cadaver.
Yeah, totally.
So the movie had a budget of $16 million. It grossed $15.1 million, but I don't think this was ever made to be like a box office smash.
I can't believe it had a budget of $16 million. That is shocking.
I'm like, how much of that is Chalamet?
Yeah. How much of that went to Chalamet? Honestly.
And Mark Rylance.
Yeah, I would. If I had to guess, I'd say like 8 to 10, if even. Yeah. Because like we don't like even the like, and I'm not saying that this is what like all the effects are kind of subtle and practical, and then there's a scene with amputated hands that's probably digital. But I can't even. Where'd the money go? Chalamet.
Honestly,
yeah. I guess maybe Chalamet and Rylance, because I think Rylance as an Academy Award winner can
he's a knight,
garner a little
I think.
Is he Sir Mark Rylance?
I believe so. Or he's like maybe one step, but he's like he's in some British secret society.
Well, that makes him sound more menacing in real life.
Good for him. Yeah.
Honestly.
The movie was directed by Luca Guadagnino, who also directed Call Me By Your Name, We Are Who We Are, and the Suspiria remake. It's written by David Kajganich and Camille De Angelis, who also wrote The Invasion, True Story, and again, the Suspiria remake. As we said, it stars Taylor Russell as Marin, who you might know from Escape Room, Waves, or Falling Skies. Timothy Chalamet as Lee, who you might know from Lady Bird, Don't Look Up, or Dune. Or I feel like we mentioned a bunch of Chalamet movies in this one already. And lastly, Mark Rylance as Sully, who you might know from Bridge of Spies, Ready Player One, or the BFG. And I just really want to quickly mention the BFG I read as a child. It is The Big Friendly Giant, and my mom, even as a child, could not stop reading as The Big Fucking Giant.
Yeah.
We had a great time with it.
Of course.
Just a couple fun facts we have here. Chloe Sevigny, which I'm never sure if it's Sevigny or Sevigny or whatever it is, but I'm going to keep saying Chloe Sevigny.
That's good.
Chloe Sevigny revealed in an interview that when Luca Guadagnino asked her to play a small but pivotal role in the film, she replied, "I'll come for you, even if it's one line." When she did get the script, she realized her character only has one actual line. And at the end of the movie, after Sully has been killed while Marin is eating Lee, there's a brief shot of the hat Sully was wearing that shows it was a Nostromo crew hat from the movie Alien.
I did notice that, and that's so weird. Because
also, literally, the episode we did before this was Alien and Aliens.
Oh, yeah. It's like, it's so funny because it's like, it's not like it was like an available prop in the 80s that you could get as sort of a replica. So like, is he from the Nostromo?
I think Mark Rylance ate Tom Skerritt. That's what I think happened.
Oh my God.
We mentioned the theory about Sully. The last thing I have, two more things. Before becoming a director, Luca Guadagnino was a successful interior decorator.
He had to have been in the visual arts based on everything I've seen of his.
That makes total sense to me.
In one way or another, having a design eye makes so much sense.
And the last one, the body of Mrs. Harmon, which they gruesomely eat together.
Real bummer, yeah.
Was made of edible silicone chunks, and the fake blood is made of dark chocolate, fruit roll-ups, brownies, and maraschino cherries.
Like you said, you don't have any fun facts, and that's the funnest fact I've heard.
That's the funnest fact. We're done. The fun is done.
Wow. That's delightful.
You know what? I feel like now if I rewatch it, I'd be like, "Ooh, that's got to taste pretty delicious."
Yeah.
Honestly, that'll give you diabetes right there.
All right, and now that we've gone through all the facts, it's time to get to some mail.
Mail time! When you control the mail, you control information.
Mom asked me to ask you if there's any mail for us here by mistake.
What?
First, we have an email from, who do you think?
Scotty Cameron.
Scotty Cam. All right. Subject, Alien and Aliens. Hey, Dylan and Gab, great show as always. I'm glad all three of you agreed the Alien movies were both movies to watch before you die because they are masterpieces. I just so happen to have both on DVD as well as Predator. Me too, Scotty. Dylan's right about both films being obvious movies to watch before you die. Ridley Scott's Alien is a masterful sci-fi horror film, and I just love how well the chest rip scene was executed. The true horror of the film was brilliant. particularly when the aliens revealed in Ripley's escape pod and she has to do the final girl routine. Then Aliens is a masterpiece in competition with T2 as James Cameron's best movie. The funny part is I can definitely see all the Terminator influence in the movie. The colonial marines have similar weapons to the human resistance in Terminator, and the planet the bulk of the film takes place on resembles the fractured future in Terminator. Cameron,
what came first?
Terminator 1 came out before Aliens. I think Terminator 1 is 84. I feel like I have to check that now. Terminator 1, 84. Yes.
Very good.
Okay. Cameron, you really like borrowing from your own movies, don't you? I also love how Bishop is used to contrast Ash from Alien and the revelation that Burke is the true villain trying to keep the xenomorph specimens to continue experimenting on. I will say I wish I had seen Aliens before the video game Aliens Colonial Marines came out because I couldn't but laugh whenever Colonial Marines was said, and it made me think of that video game, which was hot trash. I will say, when Dylan said to skip the other Alien movies, I'm like, too late for that. The first film in the franchise I saw was Alien Resurrection because it was on TV. When I saw the xenomorph, I thought, oh, this must be Alien vs. Predator, because that's the only thing I recognized the design from. Well, Alien vs. Predator and the fan film Batman Dead End, where Batman fights the Predator and a xenomorph. It wouldn't be an episode if we didn't mention Batman.
Wow.
At the time, I thought the xenomorph was the Predator because it ate Joker in the 10-minute film, while the Predator had the cool advanced technology, so it must have been the alien. Then figured out which was which in middle school when I learned that Alien vs. Predator was a crossover between two sci-fi franchises and not a movie like Cowboys and Aliens, which has nothing to do with Alien.
So Batman really be sticking his nose in places that don't belong, huh?
Well, a lot of DC heroes, I don't know why. I know that I used to have a comic book that was Green Lantern versus Aliens. And I remember as a kid, I thought it was so freaking cool that it was like Green Lantern comes across a planet and there is just a whole lot of xenomorphs on that planet. And it was like everybody was shitting their pants about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool.
Interesting. Okay.
I will just make one correction on the usage of the term bargain bin straight to video disasters. And this actually is my fault for only using the term when talking about Steven Seagal. The Steven Seagal part is only applied when talking about the movies that star Seagal. And when talking about other straight to video releases that are trash that don't star Seagal, it's just a bargain bin straight to video disasters. Hey, we have stolen this term. We could use it however we damn well please, Scotty.
Yeah, I think it's better when they don't star Steven Seagal, but we're just making a callback to some of his movies that are notoriously as bad.
Yeah, Steven Seagal just gives that trashy vibe, you know?
Yeah, we're keeping it. Thanks, Scotty.
Yeah, we'll take it from here.
Yeah.
Again, this is my fault because I'd only ever used the term in relation to this podcast when mentioning Steven Seagal. I will say when Jamie mentioned cheap alien knockoffs on the straight-to-video market, the first movies that came to mind were the Species movies because those were cheap ripoffs. Have you ever heard of the movie Species?
No.
I've heard of it because I was a young boy and there was a naked lady in it. And I found out that the alien design was also designed by H.R. Geiger, the guy who designed the xenomorph. So I guess it's somewhat less of a total knockoff because it does actually share some actual DNA, I guess. Those movies are trash. I know the first two Species movies were given theatrical releases, while the last two were straight-to-video releases. All four movies are so terrible that you could fool me into thinking they were all bargain bin straight-to-video disasters. That's all, folks. In case I don't see you again, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, Scotty.
Good night, Scotty.
I will say Scotty was quite helpful. It's nice to know that somebody listens to this podcast when it comes out because Scotty and I want to say, was it Vitz? Were the two people who let me know that my hour and 57-minute export for our Alien episode had a mistake at the end of it because for some reason my computer just decided not to put James as part of the verdicts out. So it just had us talking to him and him not responding.
Oh my God,
yeah, so I had to re-export it and that eventually got it fixed. Now that we got through Scotty's email, we do have a couple comments. First, we have a comment from Barry Manning on one of our shorts.
Barry Manilow.
Yes, he is a fanalo. He told me so himself. He put a comment on the summary of the two Alien movies and said, then Alien 3, which undoes everything for some reason. Then we have a comment from Lenola Cola. It feels odd for James to bring the chaos energy to a podcast, but it makes for a yop-tastic time. And Alien and Aliens is probably the best 1-2 punch of sci-fi films. The first film being a fantastic take on the alien on board a spaceship premise / slasher movie concept. And it is very difficult like writing premise slash slasher is easy, but to say premise slash slasher feels weird to me. Is that just me?
No, but it sounds like from SpongeBob, the hash slinging hasher.
Yes. The gas bringing, the bass fishing, the hash slinging. Yes, that was me for a second there. I was like, you can get through it.
Yes.
Okay. And the second film brings the concept of the Space Marine and the Xenomorphs having a hierarchy to their ranks to a wide audience. And the concepts introduced in Aliens help keep the franchise persisting all these years, especially the Marines, which influenced the likes of Doom and Halo. Hoorah! P.S. I wish James remembered that Kevin Conroy portrayed Batman in the Arrowverse's Crisis on Infinite Earth special. Does that count as a film? We're not counting it because that didn't come out in movie theaters. It was just a live action CW special.
Yeah, no.
Gab would not have accepted this. Nice try.
No, unacceptable.
And then we have one more comment here from Pedro Enrique.
Oh my God. Hi, Pedro.
He said, hi, it's me, Pedro. I'm back. Deal with it. We're excited to have you back. We're not dealing with it. It's fine. We'll probably send an email for a longer message.
Well, we're dealing with it, but happily.
I was going to say, he just said he's sending an email, and I'm like, bad news. I might not read it till next week. I was going to write a bigger message, but James just straight up said where he lived. I thought he lived on Big Bus, Oregon. Just broke one of the longest jokes from Jump on the Batwagon. You have to hide this for the other yappy people, Dylan. P.S. Sorry for throwing a bunch of references you don't get, Gab.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, the good thing is, I don't think the crossover is that great that people are going to be going to Oregon to get at him. All right.
Yeah, I certainly won't be.
No, I don't think you would go to like Astoria, New York to get to James, let alone Astoria, Oregon.
True. Very true.
Alrighty. Are you ready to get to the verdicts for Bones and All?
Oh, I am. Sorry, if you would have just waited a second, I could have muted myself and sneezed. But you did give me an opportunity. So yeah. How about them cannibals?
Do or do not. There is no try.
The guilty will be punished.
Sentence is death.
I love, by the way, it's very funny. It's objectively hilarious that you're like, come onto the show with a movie you think is rewatchable or sort of a movie you should watch before you die. And then you have a verdict. It's amazing. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's like, we know that you've already made your case, but like, argue it one more time.
It's so good.
Well, no matter what, we know you think it's we watch before you die. It's will the consensus be?
I love that. And this just like conceit wise, this is perfect.
So why don't you give your closing statement?
No, because I knew at the beginning, I knew by the looks in your eyes that you're like, we got to break it to this guy that we don't love this movie as much as he does. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's truly, as a conversational dynamic goes, it like works so well. So I really, because like it makes you be like, oh, I got to make a case. I don't have any case outside of this just works for me especially well. And I would, if I knew, this is a hard thing to suggest, but it's like, if I knew about this movie but didn't see this movie and then realized at the end of my life that I didn't see this movie, I feel like I would have been upset on my behalf. It hits it it spoke to and resonated within me for various reasons that I can put my finger on, and a lot of reasons I can't put my finger on, in a way that I feel like was enriching. And from here forward, I will often be thinking about the way that this movie made me feel and trying to understand why it made me feel that way.
I will say, awesome. Alex, you saw right through us better than Gab ever has, because there have been times where I've hated a movie, and I have gone through the entire episode up to the verdict, and Gab was like, you hated it that whole time. I thought so differently. I will say, I don't think it's a movie to watch before you die, but God damn it. You know what? Throughout this entire conversation, I've been like, boy, we're making a lot of good points as for why, yeah, it wasn't like deeply entertaining, but it stuck with all of us, and maybe I should say differently. And I wanted to come into this being like, I hated it. This sucks. You're wrong. And I'm like, no, it doesn't suck. I don't hate it. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I feel honored that you at least have that tension.
you certainly swayed me in a lot of ways during this conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a mood watch before you die, but I do think if you have heard this conversation and found anything we said remotely interesting, you should leap at the opportunity to see this movie. It's on Prime Video, which everyone has through some random family member. You should definitely watch it.
Yeah. Alex, I'm gonna echo what Dylan said, because I came into this thinking I did not enjoy this. I don't see any redeeming qualities. And as we talk through it and as you gave your remarks, I am almost in a position where I feel like, and this is sort of the gold standard for me, I would watch this again with my boyfriend, Corey, who was not home when I watched it. So to have someone very close to me to talk to about it, to be able to re-experience and have that conversation. And I think I would have been swayed by you if it weren't for how grotesque it was and how much I could not stomach. Like, I think when Corey gets home, I'm going to say, listen, I think maybe you should watch it on your own and we could talk about it, but I don't think I could handle it again. Even watching it through a different lens with Sully not being real and all of those really interesting things. I have never seen a movie that has made me feel the way that this movie feels. And for better or for worse, it will be with me forever. But I don't think I could categorize it on the same list as the one that we are creating.
Sure.
Though, I mean, we said the same thing about Vampire's Kiss, and a couple of weeks later, we had to take it back. So who knows where this is going to land? But at this moment, on this day, at this time, I can't say it, even though we've named some movies. Like we said, The Lost Boys. And you know what? I could probably live the rest of my life and never watch it again and be totally fine.
If it makes you feel any better, and you have nothing to feel better, but if it just a thing to relate to you on, again, I've seen this movie 5 or 6 times since. I have not rewatched several of the gory scenes knowing that they're coming since, because when I was a kid, I wanted to go into horror practical effects. I was so taken with them. And I find some of the scenes in this movie so deeply, quote, real and unsettling. I can't look at them because I'll be having empathetic pain by watching them. So I feel that makes sense.
Now we know
100%.
It's cherries and fruit roll-ups and stuff. So that makes us all feel better.
No problem. Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing this movie with us. I mean, whether we are adding it to the list or not, it was truly one that will stick with us.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and we want to give you a moment to what's the saying I'm looking for here?
Plug.
Have your flowers to plug. Yeah. Tell the people where they can find you. Have your flowers.
I have a show called You Are Good, a feelings podcast about movies that I host with my great friend Sarah Marshall. We review movies not through a critical lens, but through a lens of what feelings it evokes, and then we talk about that and the movies themselves. So, so yeah, if you want to have sideways conversations about movies, we're here for you.
I love that. That's awesome.
Big thanks to Alex. You should definitely listen to You Are Good because I've been loving the episodes lately. And Gab, why don't you tell the people where they can find us?
Well, Dylan, people can find us wherever the hell they're listening to us right now. So if you found us, congratulations. Keep doing what you're doing. We're going to be here. We're going to stay here. Otherwise, you can find us on all your favorite podcast places. You can find us on YouTube. Oh, boy.
You can find us on YouTube. Nesquik and YouTube. And all exactly your favorite chocolate drinks.
Exactly. All your favorite. Dylan,
what's happening to you?
I'm done. You do it.
So if you check the link tree below in the description, you can find us on any podcast platform you prefer. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you're like, hey, I want to find them on Google Podcasts, it'll take you right there. Not only that, we're also a member of the Hall of Pods podcasting network. So if you want, you can click in that link tree link below and you can find us and all of our podcasting friends. So in addition to that, I would also say you should send us a voicemail at where, Gab?
Oh boy. Anchor.fm/movies to watch.
Or you can send us an email at where, Gab?
Movies to watch before you die at gmail.com.
I feel like I should start giving you multiple choice. You look so puzzled. Yeah, do those things. Subscribe to us on YouTube or send in a comment. Let us know
email.
If you like what we're saying. Let us know if you want us to do more things like asking how we should change the genre of the movie, which I thought went fantastically well this episode.
Thank you. So did I.
We should you know what? Don't tell me what you think because we're going to keep doing it either way.
We're doing it. It's staying. Dylan, make the theme music.
Thought I was the only one. Are there lots of us?
Not lots, but more than you'd think. You've met a few, sure, that you know of. You never had anyone take an interest in you? A double take?